Thank you very much, first for inviting me and then for putting me in such an eminent panel. I must confess by saying that born into a life of privilege and having spent 30 years overseas as an expat, I have very little connectivity to the community action kind of spectrum of the world. So let me maybe pick up where Rohini left off. I think at some profound level, the people get the government they deserve. That is, to the extent that they are involved in the democracy, that they make their voices heard, that they make their preferences known, that they're able to coalesce the right kind of support to it, then that's the outcome they get. And in fact, when I find very inexplicable outcomes at, say, the national level or in the northern belts, that's what alleviates some of the agony I feel when I see people who have very poor performance continuously getting re-elected. But be that as it may, I'll also pick up on a second point that Ronan mentioned, which is empathy. And I think empathy is the foundation for a lot of things. By coincidence, about 20 plus years ago, when I first went to Wall Street, one of the best traders I ever met in my life told me the single greatest value of a trader or attribute of a trader is empathy. To be able to know what is in the mind of the person on the other side of the phone, whether you're dealing tens of millions or billions. That's the real asset. Maybe I start from there and say, if I'm going to talk about Sarkar, what defines a Sarkar, first of all, has to be the philosophy and values of the movement of the party that gets to be elected and form the Sarkar. In the case of the Dravidian movement, in which I'm a very proud fourth generation representative, it was always about inclusion, about self-respect, about an egalitarian society, about mostly social norms, and then eventually to economic equality as well. But those values started in the 1921 series of legislation when the Justice Party, the forefather of all Dravidian parties, first formed the government under diarchy. They started with enfranchising women, which till then did not exist in India, in fact, in many parts of the world. Then with compulsory elementary education for all communities, for boys and girls. Then feeding them to make sure that they could get compliance with the compulsory law. Communal GO, which reserved government jobs in the proportion to the population of every community, from Adi Dravidas to every other community, to ensure that every community had a mentor, an example, a forerunner who could then pull the rest of the community with them and the rest of their village or town with them. So the values have stayed unchanging from 1916 when the Justice Party was founded and my great-granduncle was one of the signatories, through the Justice Party governments where my grandfather was a minister, chief minister, through the DMK governments where my father was speaker and minister. And after 30 years overseas, I've come back and been an MLA and a minister. Our values, the party's values, have stayed the same. Of course, things change economically, societally, environmentally, and part of a good Sarkar is being able to adapt your policies, adapt your execution model to the changing times. So I don't want to go too much into it, but I'd say that the shift has focused away from purely social justice, equality, access to your own language, entry into temples, all communities treated the same, removal of kind of a caste and hierarchy system. Not 100% complete, but much better than in most places and much better than it used to be, towards more of a economic inclusion, equal opportunity for people who don't have the ability to get the same quality education and so forth. And so maybe I give one example of that. Till this year, various governments, starting with the DMK government back in the 70s and 80s, and including the ADMK government, had started giving incentives or support for marriages. Because one of the things we found was many times it is not just about lifting people out from one economic strata to another, but also keeping them there. And the thing that brought them down a lot is always, anywhere in the world, health problems, if you don't have a universal health system, and then big expenses like weddings. And so at various times, various governments actually started and expanded, started with the DMK, but expanded through many governments, assistance for weddings for women. And they gave two levels of awards. One, if you were not as educated, a lower level, 25,000 and 8 grams silver of gold. And then if you were college educated, 50,000, 8 grams of gold. And this year we had an intense discussion internally, and we decided that we would accept some of the criticism that these schemes were more towards almost encouraging marriage or even supporting a kind of dowry system. And because these schemes had anyway not been executed for 4 or 5 years and the backlog had built up and people had gone on with their lives, we decided we'd completely break that scheme and instead refocus the scheme towards women's education, because we were finding 52% of the Tamil Nadu population is not in the actively seeking workforce. And the bulk of that is women. So we said, what we got to do is the kind of good attendance in school, in high school, and +2 graduation rates we see of women equal our men. We got to continue that through other education. So we've transformed that scheme, and now we've made that scheme into 1,000 rupees a month supplemental scholarship, supplemental to any other benefit, irrespective of whether you go to a government institution, free, cheap, whatever. If you leave after 10th and go to an ITI or a polytechnic, we will pay till you finish your course. If you leave after 12th and go to a arts or a science or engineering or a medical college, we will pay that every month till you finish. And if I had my way, I would also put in some kind of lump sum payment at the end of graduation, but maybe we'll bring that next year. So we have transformed our interpretation of how we execute our values based on the economic circumstances and based on the data that we get. Of course, the final part of that is to have good systems and good infrastructure. As a guy who ran very large businesses globally for very large institutions, I've been appalled at the lack of continuity, lack of data, lack of institutional memory, lack of institutional knowledge that governments kind of are exemplified by. And so, I'm on a path with my Chief Minister's support to improve that. We are working with a lot of brilliant minds around, plus the experiences that I bring from running large operations across the world. And one of the things that our data suggests is that we have a real problem getting our schemes to the bottom of the pyramid. Even something like our old age pension or a disability pension or a widow pension, which we've had for 10, 15 years, our study suggests that we get to the second lowest level of the pyramid, but we don't get to the lowest. We are an aging society. We have a very low fertility rate to match our kind of middle income GSDP per capita of about 3 lakh rupees a year. So we have only about a 1.6 fertility rate, total fertility rate. We have an aging population. Some of these people are living alone. And those are a significant number, like 14, 16%. And those who are living alone don't know technology, don't have somebody to help them enroll. They are getting left out. So as I've said on the floor of the House, that is administrative failure, that is a blot on our conscience. And so we are trying to improve the systems to make sure that we can reach, and looking at it, I'd say just in two closing things. Till now, we have had government departments get allocated budgets and then they try to decide how they spend the money. And this has worked reasonably well, but it's left this huge gap for two reasons. The first reason, in any democracy, the people who have access, the unions, the powerful, the rich, the able to buy lobbying or electoral bonds, always get their voices heard. That's the fallacy of any democracy. It's not unique, or the structural flaw in any democracy. What we miss are the poor, the weak, the unorganized, who are not able to get their voices heard. And so the mark of a good government is to figure out how we overcome the structural flaw in the democracy and go to the bottom of the pyramid. And as part of that, we want to change the entire focus away from department-based schemes to beneficiary-based ecosystems. And we're getting a lot of help from our global economic advisors for that. So we want to have a universal health system. What are the different kinds of components of that? Who's likely to access it? At what age in their life? How do we get that into one integrated? And then we have different parts of the government do different functions in that. We want to have one integrated coverage of senior system. It's no longer about you having to enroll. We will automatically enroll you. We will automatically link you to what we call Makkale Thedi Marthum. The house delivery of medicines will now be expanded to do house delivery of mental counseling and check-in. And then once a year, you come and take your vitals with us. And that's the equivalent of what a pensioner gives as a life certificate to say you're still alive. Instead of that, you come and take your test, and we can use that to track your medical progress. And we get some software from the University of California that will do some machine learning and will tell us who's likely to end up having serious heart problems or liver or kidney problems the next year, so forth. So it's not the components that are remarkable. Different systems will have different components, but we change the focus. It is not about the government. It is not about the money. It is not about the departmental spending. It is about the beneficiary or the intended beneficiary. Look at it from their perspective. What are their lives like? And how do we provide a comprehensive set of services or safety net or support systems, whether that's in education, whether that's in health, whether that's in the notion of a comprehensive welfare policy, a social welfare policy. So anyway, I think, our philosophy is quite different from the government that runs the union. But I think that I'll end where I started. If you don't start with compassion and empathy, almost everything else is irrelevant. You will never be a good government. So as far as Sarkar is concerned, I think compassion, empathy, and then competence, administration, execution, technology, these will be the basis for determining outcomes and future kind of satisfaction. Thank you. I can understand Hindi, but I can't speak, so it's okay. I'll speak in English. Look, I think there's a big problem. I'll just give you my experiences going as opposition MLA and then as minister. So opposition MLA, I set up, because of my previous experience of it, I set up a pretty sophisticated office with a lot of helpers, data systems, CRM, database of all my voters, cross-referencing all their requests, so forth. There's a broader philosophical question I'll come back to at the end of this, but because of that, I was able to get about 600 people who were eligible for pensions from the government. We validated 100% of them, and we gave it in. And partly because of my reputation, my standing, my connectivity, whatever, I got better treatment than most MLAs. But that still only amounted to about 150, maybe 175 getting them, because the government had no money, and they had an unwritten rule that only when people passed away they could issue new pensions.
Yes,
now, the irony of that is that having come to office and having announced in my first budget that we're going to do a data kind of purity project, we found in the data purity project that there were almost 1 lakh people who were listed as dead in the civil register. Now you can tell the civil register itself is not that accurate in good times. During COVID times, it's especially inaccurate because the deaths are not being recorded. We have seen many studies. And yet there were almost 1 lakh people who were listed as expired, who were still drawing pension benefits or these social security benefits, and some passed away as early as 2017. For 4.5 years, the system was still paying them. So clearly, there's a breakdown here. There's 2 parts to this. The one that's within our control is relatively easy. We're going to do automatic enrollment, as I just said. It will maybe take us a couple of weeks. But anyway, let me just make one more data point. Once I became minister, I expanded my infrastructure because I said, I'm going to spend even less time in Madurai. I don't have the luxury of meeting my constituents as often. I put in a bigger team, tens of people on the ground. And this time I got about 900 and something applications that we were able to validate out of my 250,000 voters. And partly because I'm in government, partly because we removed this constraint in the finance department. We said, whatever it costs, we pay, because we announced it in the assembly. We've got 800 and something of them processed and getting their money. The bad news in this is when I dug a little deeper, my guys on the ground told me that the going rate for getting this 1,000 rupees in perpetuity till you passed was almost 17,000 rupees. Just think about that. You had to pay 17,000 rupees to get 1,000 rupees a month. And depending on your age, maybe your longevity was, 2 years or 3 years. So to get back like 25 or 30 or 40,000 rupees, over time, you have to pay upfront 70,000. It's atrocious. So the solution we have is that we're going to use a whole lot of data, and we're going to automatically enroll everybody who is above a certain age and we know to be living alone or widowed. And then we just say to activate your pension, all you have to do is show up at one of the health camps that we run regularly, record your basic kind of blood tests and heart check and PP, And as long as you come back every year to a health camp, you will automatically keep getting the payment. So we will notify you saying that you are eligible. If you don't have a phone, we'll send somebody to you and say you have now been enrolled for pension. Please come and take the health test. And as I said, we'll use that health database to keep checking their progress and so forth. But there's a big problem here, and that problem maybe is not so acute when you have people like me or my government or my party, but is extremely acute when you have the people who are running the government in Delhi, is that at some level there is no privacy anymore. We will know what you're doing across all the different platforms. For example, we gave 4,000 rupees a ration card as part of our manifesto to provide demand stimulus during the COVID lockdown. Now our data shows us that lakhs and lakhs of cards, maybe 5, 6, 7 lakhs of cards, have never availed of a single product from a fair price shop before the 4,000 rupees and never availed of it after the 4,000 rupees. Now, because we are about the only state that does universal issuance of ration cards, and then we stratify who gets what goods at what price and so forth. But we issue everybody a ration card. Maybe it's because of that, but now we have basically spent about between 250, 300 crores to people who otherwise never felt the need to come and access a single product at any time in their lives from the public distribution system. In my mind, that's not an efficient use of money. So the point is, if you start cross-referencing a lot of these things, we offered a gold loan waiver. The initial bill was 15, 18,000 crores. When we did all the cross-referencing, took out the frauds, the empty covers, the one family split their gold into 40 applications, etc. The bill only came out of about 5,000 crores. So that's how much the system is being played by the lack of data. Now we have to make the trade-off. Clean data will allow us to not leave anybody behind. And again, our philosophy is very clear, which I've stated on the floor of the House. The lowest sin of all is an ineligible beneficiary getting a government benefit as long as it's an individual. So our stated policy is if the fingerprint doesn't match in the ration shop, give them the rice and the food anyway. We don't care. Let them not starve. We don't care if the one ration that the union forced on us with the Aadhaar linkage and all that. We just don't care. If it doesn't match, give them the stuff. So that is the lowest sin. The next high sin is if somebody who is eligible is turned away or not covered, then we feel that's administrative. But the cardinal sin is finding these institutional malfeasance instances where this cannot be done by one person. There's, lorry loads of rice disappear from the public distribution system, or lakhs of ration cards or fake ration cards. These kinds of things are complete unacceptable to me, at least in my role as finance minister. That's the cardinal sin. And to prevent that, we have to rely on data, we have to rely on integration. But the more we do that, the less privacy a citizen has. So that's the fine balance that we're trying to figure out